Hi, I'm Steve Golub. This is the third and last in a series of videos about legal empowerment. In this one, I'm going to talk about why legal empowerment is important. And that importance begins with some indications of impact, how it's actually helped people and benefited their lives. So this talk is going to start with a number of examples, most of them validated by external evaluations or studies about how legal empowerment has helped people. I'll then wrap up by touching on some broader themes. So let's get started. Now, I'll start with an unpleasant topic, that of war and conflict around the world. The good news, however, is that legal empowerment has proven kind of helpful in some post-conflict states. What are examples of this? Well, there's Bosnia, where a legal services NGO, that is a non-governmental organization, has proven helpful for displaced and disenfranchised people in rebuilding their lives, helping with housing, with health issues, with other types of issues. In Sierra Leone and Liberia, which both experienced horrible conflicts, internal civil wars, there's been paralegal activity initiated by NGOs that has helped people to settle conflicts on a community level in ways that, number one, are better than they otherwise might have been settled in the absence of paralegals, and number two, has helped prevent these internal community conflicts from escalating. Sometimes these paralegals have also helped people to in the communities in dealing with outside forces that are impinging on their interests and rights. Another example of legal empowerment work has been across the whole range of gender issues in which women have been harmed by the denial of their rights, regarding violence, regarding inheritance, regarding property rights. Often women are really stepped on in various ways, denied, for example, the inheritance of their husband's property when the husbands pass away. What's been a significant achievement is that many NGOs and other programs around the world have helped women in overcoming this. To pick just one example regarding violence against women, an NGO in Namibia has been instrumental in drafting and getting passed a piece of legislation combating violence against women. And working with allies, it has helped to get that legislation implemented to make concrete differences in the lives of women who would be or have been victimized by that problem. There's been a very interesting development in terms of the growing integration of legal empowerment and public health. It's still really just glimmers, but those glimmers are growing and are illuminating how these two fields can fit together. So we see regarding HIV/AIDS, the scourge of much of the world, particularly much of the developing world, we have situations where using the law has helped people who've been suffering from that disease. We see in Kenya, for example, that a public health program has been enabled to start a legal aid clinic that has prevented or battled against people being discriminated against because they have the disease, or people being denied government benefits because they have the disease. In South Africa, some landmark public interest litigation taken up onto the Constitutional Court there has helped ensure that people get medication, which has helped prevent the spread of the disease. Very important in that country. Thousands and thousands of people benefiting. In another public health instance of the integration with legal empowerment, we see in Uganda an interesting example of people being able to know and act on their rights to basic medical services and to basic medicines that they otherwise wouldn't receive. Not just in Uganda, but in many countries, often public health services such as medicines and basic medical care, or educational services, or other types of services that there's money for and that governments are supposed to support or provide are denied to people. Why? It's because of corruption, because of bureaucracy, because of people not showing up for their work at these medical dispensaries. In Uganda, on a pilot project, what was found that when people were helped to monitor these services, when they were met with the people delivering these basic medical services, when they were informed, for example, that they shouldn't be charged for basic medicines or basic services, a number of really positive benefits accrued. For one thing, the services, that is the medical dispensaries, stayed open more often when they were supposed to. People weren't overcharged the way they had been previously. And there were some really vital, important bottom line impacts in terms of public health, such as drops in infant mortality. Now, I just described this Uganda example in terms of public health, which it certainly is, but it also reflects the concept of social accountability. What is social accountability? Well, it's kind of development speak that the World Bank and some other institutions use for some very basic concepts. That is, citizens and society holding the state responsible for services it's supposed to deliver. That's at the core of this notion of social accountability. It's a big part of it. What's another example? In India, we see in a major state there, people using the country's freedom of information law to be able to know what local governments are doing with their funds, how they're spending their budgets, monitoring those local government decisions, and having input into that as a result. Previously, all too often, people were in the dark about how well and how honestly local government funds were being spent. So accountability is really crucial. We also see the international organization Transparency International, which, as you may know, is very involved with anti-corruption work around the globe, setting up legal aid clinics in many countries, focusing on the problem of corruption, giving people a chance to report instances of corruption, helping them out when these problems arise, getting at this problem that undermines effective governance in so many ways in so many countries. In addition, these legal aid centers serve the additional function of collecting some hard, reliable data on how the problem manifests itself, which they then use to begin to lobby, influence, persuade governments to take the problem seriously and to act on specific patterns of corruption. Let's talk about land. It should come as no surprise that access to land and access to natural resources is very important to many people in many countries. And there are some very positive indications that legal empowerment helps people to get title to land or to otherwise protect their land tenure. So we see in the Philippines where paralegals who themselves are farmers help their fellow farmers to take advantage of a land reform law. So in comparison with in areas where the paralegals are not active, the land reform law, viewed in a few different ways through different methodologies, has been judged more successful. In Ecuador, we see paralegals helping indigenous groups, cultural minorities, assert and protect their communal land use rights. This is important because there often is a trend in the world, or there's been a tendency to just look at individual property rights, because many people, many societies view property in that way. But for some groups, they don't think of individual use. They think of individual ownership. They think of communal use, and it's been a struggle to get those recognized. Well, a combination of efforts in Ecuador has resulted in the legal recognition of communal use, and again, the implementation of that legal reform by paralegals helping people to register their land appropriately. Furthermore, when we're talking about land, there are all sorts of instances documented by the Food and Agriculture Organization, the International Development Law Organization, the Institute for Environment and Development, the International Institute for Environment and Development, all sorts of instances in Africa of people being able to learn about and better protect their land through legal empowerment efforts. In another video, I briefly described the problem of people being detained in prison, often without trial. Well, I want to expand on that a little bit right now because it's a testimony to the work of the Open Society Justice Initiative that it's been very involved in documenting the problem of this unjust, excessive pretrial detention. Why is pretrial detention important? Because in addition to treating prisoners themselves unfairly, many of them, again, innocent and simply unjustly detained by the police, it has very negative ramifications in terms of health, family stability, economics for families who are denied the presence of their family members in their communities and at home. So that's one instance of many where criminal justice issues are involved with legal empowerment. Another, in a similar vein, has been the earlier work done by Penal Reform International in helping to get a paralegal program up and running in Malawi that has helped people deal with the problem of excessive pretrial detention, and that model being both documented as having been successful by a few different reviews and spreading to a number of different countries elsewhere in Africa and beyond. And if you go far enough back to the dark days of the apartheid era, some landmark public interest litigation cases then began to poke holes and undermine the structure of that repressive regime. The point there being that, of course, working through the courts and public interest litigation works best when we have full-fledged democracies operating, but in some cases, even repressive governments can be their repression can be undermined to some extent by public interest litigation going through the courts. Not everywhere, but in some countries, such as in South Africa. One other point that's worth making about South Africa is that it's a leading example of what could be called an integrated legal empowerment structure. That is, the government there, and to some extent, development agencies and private sources have put together a national legal aid structure that includes, of course, lawyers. It also includes law students. It also includes, and university law clinics. It includes the work of paralegals, public interest law firms, community-based centers that help educate and provide assistance to people regarding their legal problems. This integrated kind of structure is something that South Africa is a leading example of. It's not perfect, but it's ahead of many other countries. And we're finding this gradually developing in other parts of the world, Poland being another good example. Now, talking about Poland, it's also illustrative because it's an example of how you begin to build public interest law, legal empowerment, social action litigation, whatever term we want to use, through university law clinics. South Africa, as I mentioned, is another example. These things are going on in the Philippines through university-based law clinics and human rights clinics, in India, in parts of Latin America as well. We see that there's a feeder mechanism for getting lawyers involved with this kind of progressive work through various types of human rights or specifically women's rights or other clinics that give law students exposure to the problems of the disadvantaged and how to assist them. It's a step towards building and sustaining legal empowerment well into the future by getting the legal profession more engaged with it. I'm going to wrap up this video and this series of 3 videos by highlighting a few broad themes, 3 to be exact. First, while much of legal empowerment work, as I previously mentioned in another video, is really work that goes under other titles, legal aid, developmental lawyering, a number of other terms, public interest litigation. An exciting trend in legal empowerment is the way it's beginning to integrate into work in other development fields. I mentioned a few examples of how it's beginning to blend into public health. There are also examples regarding local governance budgeting, accountability of government. We also could look at potential applications regarding education to make sure that people's rights to education, where there are resources available, those resources are actually used rather than wasted or bled off through corruption. Irrigation, agriculture, there's lots more room for integration. This is part of the future of legal empowerment and part of what could make development work and rights-oriented work generally more powerful, and have greater impact, more effective. So it's worth looking towards the future of legal empowerment as involving that integration, because previously justice sector tended to be, law and development tended to be a kind of conceptual and programmatic ghetto, just focusing on laws, lawyers, courts. This integration that I'm talking about opens up doors for law to be blended more into yielding all sorts of powerful impacts. So that's one point I want to leave you with. Another is just to return to the point that legal empowerment is about the needs, the priorities, the rights, the issues that most directly affect people. It's really crucial in that regard that that's what sometimes sets it aside from broader law and development work. Finally, in emphasizing again how legal empowerment is about issues and priorities and rights that most directly affect the disadvantaged, we have to keep in mind that the solutions themselves should most engage the disadvantaged. Legal empowerment is not about the poor being clients of lawyers or being passive participants in their own development. Of course, sometimes the restrictions on their income, their attitudes, a sense of powerlessness may restrict them, may keep them from fully asserting their rights, and they need the help of allies, be they lawyers or NGOs or other people and organizations who can align with them. However, to the extent possible, legal empowerment is about people, the poor, the disadvantaged themselves, directly engaging in finding and asserting solutions to their legal problems and to their related problems. And that, in the end, that direct engagement of the poor, of the disadvantaged, in identifying and pressing for solutions to their legal and unrelated problems whenever possible, is, after all, much of what rights and development are all about. Thanks for watching.